and it hits me, oh my gosh, this is that triangle.
You know, there's explanation for everything that occurred in the Rendlesham Forest incident that doesn't involve aliens at all.
It was completely silent. It comes right over our heads.
He saw a classic flying saucer really standing in the clearing.
He turned over to my father and held his hand, and he looked in his eyes and he said, "We're not alone."
Welcome to Podcast UFO for our live show. We're live every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on podcastufo.com. During the show, feel free to participate live in our chat room. And don't forget to like us on our very active Facebook page.
Hello and welcome to the show. This is Martin Willis, the host. You're live. We're live tonight, which is, we usually do the news pre-recorded with Alejandro. We have a special guest coming up in just a minute. And her name is Heather Wade. And for the rest of the show, we have Dr. Richard O'Connor coming up. And I'll tell you a little bit more about him later. There are ways you can listen to the show for free. And that is live every Wednesday evening, 8 to 10 Eastern Time. And that's the same time as New York City. And that's at Podcast UFO. You can also jump in the chat room there and participate. We also run on the Dark Matter Digital Network, and we have a new time slot that's pre-recorded, of course, and it's at 10 o'clock to midnight Eastern Standard Time or 7 to 9 Pacific Time. And right after that is Midnight in the Desert with Heather Wade. She's in Art Bell's seat over there, so check it out when you can. And she has the great guests that Art always had, and we're bringing Heather on right now to talk about that. Heather, how are you?
Well, it's a crazy day as usual. How are you doing, Martin?
I'm doing great. And let's talk about, you were just thrown into that position without any warning at all when Art had all those problems starting, was it October or November last year?
It was October 21st. He was doing a show with Dr. Bill Forstchen, and his neighbors saw a car drive up, and someone in that car had a rifle, fired 4 or 5 shots to the studio house that Art did his show from. And that was at about 10:20 p.m. that while Art was on the air. So he asked his guest at the time, Dr. Forstchen, to hang on for a moment. He put some music on. He went outside to check it out. And he came back inside since the shooter was gone. And he had a show he was in the middle of, and he finished the show. There were several incidents after that, too. They seemed to occur about every 3 weeks.
And then it was sometime in December. Wasn't it like a Thursday night or something in December where he just said, that's it, I'm done for now because of the threats? And you jumped right in there, right?
Yep, it was a Friday. He thought
Wow, we're actually having a little bit of a Skype problem with you, Heather.
Are we?
Yeah. I'm not able to hear you.
You're not?
Oh, now I can. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm very sorry about that.
That's no problem. So I've been listening to the show, and I think it's been going great. You've had some really amazing guests on there. You had Chris Cotter from the X-Files. You've had all kinds of amazing people, and it's kind of like the same tradition going on as when Art was there. I think you're doing a great job.
Well, thank you, and it absolutely is. Since he had to step away, even though he was increasing his security, what it really came down to was his family or his radio show, 2 things that he loves. And he ended up choosing his family and asked me if I would then host the show, which I wasn't quite sure if I was ready for. But if I'm going to do it, I thought the best way to do that is to keep it exactly in his tradition and keep the structure of the show the same. The same music, the same guests, hold it up to the same standards.
Right. I think you've been doing a great job. And the other night you had John Carricow on, who was a whistleblower for the CIA on torture, and what a great show that was. And you are, so it's not just paranormal, you're doing kind of like the old Art Bell shows were, for forever, actually. Just plain interesting guests, not always just paranormal.
That's right. Anything that concerns people. Art has often said that talk shows shouldn't be about any one thing. They should be about life. And so that means we'll cover environmental issues, we'll cover current issues, the current news, along with the paranormal.
Right. And tonight you have I think you have a UFO person on there tonight, right?
For a little bit of fun, sure. Jeff Willis is going to tell us all how we can hunt UFOs ourselves and get footage like he does. Now, on my Facebook page, it's really funny. I think people have misunderstood, and they think that Jeff is going to tell people actually how to capture a craft. I think they've misunderstood, and maybe they didn't go to his website to see all the good UFO footage that he's able to get. He has a specific technique, a way that he's able to go out and get footage on a regular basis. For years now, he's done that, and he was a guest on Coast to Coast with Art years and years ago, so I thought let's have a little fun and let's talk with Jeff Willis about what he does.
Yeah, it's Willis sounds like my name, but it's with an E. ES at the end. No relation. I just want to make that clear. So for the people that listen to this show and want to hear the topic of UFOs or a bunch of other subjects, it's on 5 nights a week from Monday through Friday. And the time it's right after my shows when they air over at the Dark Matter Digital Network, which is, it starts at 9 o'clock Pacific time, which is midnight on the East Coast, and runs for 3 hours. It's a great fun. I hope you check it out. You don't have to listen to it live. You can always subscribe for, I think is it $5 a month or something like that?
Yeah, it's $4.99. Years ago, Art used to sell particular shows. You could get a copy of a certain show if you liked it, you know. He would often announce during the program, hey, if you want to get a copy of this show, this is how you can do it. And the price was a lot higher back then. Now a person can subscribe, become a time traveler, and then you've got access to the entire archive for $4.99. And you can get all the shows that you want. Or if you're just not a night owl or you can't be awake during those hours to listen to the show, you can always pick it up that way.
Yes, and so you can go way back into Art's archives. And Art actually showed up. I listened to the show the other day. He showed up on last Friday night. So occasionally he will show up on the show.
That's right.
So, and that'll always be exciting. And all right, Heather, well, thank you so much. And I highly encourage everyone to go check it out. Of course, you can listen on the Dark Matter Digital Network or just go over to midnightinthedesert.com. And every day during the week, you'll see who the new guest is posted up there. And great fun. If you're a night owl and you want to listen live, that's fine. But if you want to subscribe as a podcast, check it out. And there's probably 1 or 2 shows a week that are UFO related for all you UFO fans out there.
We'll cover hauntings, we'll cover cryptozoology, we'll cover things that our government is doing or that we have proof they're doing. We'll cover environmental issues. We'll cover just about anything that's interesting. I guarantee it is a show like no other. And keep in mind, for everybody out there, you can also listen on shortwave. We're broadcast on a great shortwave station, WTWW, out of Nashville, Tennessee, at 5085 on the shortwave dial. So if you don't have, if you find yourself in an area without internet access or cell phone access, you have shortwave radio, that is a great way to pick up the show. That one affiliate covers all of the United States.
That's amazing. And there's actually, I've listened to the call. I've listened to call-ins when people are saying that's how they're listening. So there must be quite an audience on just shortwave.
There is. There's There is an astounding number of people listening on shortwave select stations throughout the country, also the stream that we have. And those people wouldn't be there if it wasn't something interesting. There are people that show up every single night. They don't want to miss it because we're always doing something very interesting. Thursday, for St. Patrick's Day, we're going to have Dennis Stone on to talk about America's Stonehenge. I don't know how many of you know that America does have its very own Stonehenge. We're going to find out all about that Thursday night. And I'm working on getting an actual human-alien hybrid on the show for next week. So these are things you don't want to miss.
Oh, my goodness. How about that? I didn't even know that. Wow, interesting. Well, Heather, thanks so much. And I really appreciate you filling in for Alejandro. Of course, this isn't UFO news, but I really appreciate you filling in.
I didn't know I was filling in for someone right now.
Well, I said we'll have a special guest, and then you are the special guest, and I really appreciate you coming on.
Well, it's a pleasure to come on, and I hope the rest of your show with your guest is a lot of fun.
Great. All right, Heather, you take care.
Take it easy, Martin. Break a leg.
All right. Yeah, bye-bye.
Bye.
All right. So getting back to our guest, that, of course, was Heather Wade from the Dark Matter, from the Midnight in the Desert. I'm sorry, I'm a little bit under the weather still. For those of you who know that I actually had to skip a show back, I'm still have to take a couple of cough breaks here and there, but I am carrying on and seem to be getting a little bit better as we go along. About our guest tonight, Dr. Richard O'Connor, a little bit about him. He's an American physician who has practiced anesthesiology for 27 years, excuse me, at St. Peter's Hospital in Helena, Montana. Early in his career, he became closely acquainted with Dr. Jesse Marcel Jr., who was on the medical staff there. And after learning of Dr. Marcel's involvement as a first-hand witness to the event we know as the Roswell incident, of course, and after getting to know Dr. Marcel, not only as a medical colleague, but also as a close friend, Dr. O'Connor became convinced that American citizens were not being told the truth about what actually transpired at Roswell and other situations. It's become his mission to do what he can to help to set the record straight. Now, I met Richard in Phoenix, and I'm actually really looking forward to the show tonight. And Alejandro Rojas will be on next week. So, pardon me. All right, everyone. So hang in there right after this quick music break, and I mean a quick one tonight, and we'll be right back with our guest, Dr. O'Connor. Hello, Richard. How are you?
Hi, Martin. I'm doing well, thanks.
Good. And we met out in Phoenix, and it wasn't that a great time out there?
You know, that's about the third time that I've been to that International UFO Congress, and each time I go, I'm always amazed at the information that's shared there and the quality of the presentations that are made. And so, yeah, I really enjoy going to that. I feel like I learn a lot every time I go.
Yeah, I do too. I mean, that was only my second time there, but I really enjoyed it. So anyone listening live, you can jump over and get right into the chat room. I'm just visiting that right now and say hello to all of you over there. And if you have any questions for our guests as we're moving along tonight, feel free to put them in our chat room, and I'll try to ask our guest. So that is the Roswell Library. The Marcel Library. That's something you put together, and what a great little building that is. And you live in Montana. Can you tell? Well, let me just put it this way: did you have an interest in UFOs at all before you spoke with Dr. Marcel?
Not really. I don't recall paying a lot of attention to it. Of course, I was aware of rumors and things of that nature, but I just never really paid much attention to it. I was getting my education through college and medical school and residency, and I was very busy and just didn't really have a lot of time to spend with something that I just was very peripherally acquainted with, So it wasn't until I moved with my family here to Helena back in 1988 that and I started working on the medical staff of St. Peter's that I met Dr. Marcel, who's an ENT surgeon here in town. And I think he moved to Helena in like 1978. So he'd been here 10 years before I ever arrived. And anyway, because he's a surgeon and I work as an anesthesiologist, of course, our paths crossed in the operating room quite often. So I got to know him very well over that time.
Now, how did the subject come up of how did that all happen? Were you just sitting talking somewhere one day and all of a sudden the subject came up?
No, actually, the best I can recall, I think one evening I had been watching some television, which I really don't watch a lot of television, but one evening I guess I had been drawn to this documentary program about the Roswell incident, and I heard his name mentioned and actually
really
saw him I think on the TV giving his testimony about what he knew about it, and I was kind of shocked, just to see that this man that I knew and worked with as a surgeon, because he had never actually mentioned this to me before. And so I think, the next time I saw him, which was probably just 2-3 days later, we're in the operating room together, and I said, "Hey, Jess, I didn't know that you were a firsthand witness and directly involved in that whole incident that took place at Roswell." And so he said, "Yeah, I was. That was my father that picked up the material out of the desert and brought it home and displayed it to my mother and I on the kitchen floor." And so that was one sort of characteristic about him, was that he didn't go around, announcing to people, "Hey, I've got a great story to tell." I probably knew him 6 months before I ever heard from him that this was, and I was the one that brought it up. So he was the kind of person that was a very humble individual, and if you were interested and you wanted information about it and wanted to discuss it with him, then he was never hesitant at all to sit down and have a conversation about it, but he did not go around trying to convince people that he had a story that they needed to listen to, Was there ever, that you were aware of, was there ever any, sort of like ridicule, talking behind his back or anything like that? Or did he get support from, fellow workers on the staff? Yeah, I think everybody that I knew on the medical staff at St. Peter's had a great deal of respect for Dr. Marcel, and I never heard anybody speak negatively or unkindly or, any kind of ridicule about it. And I think that's what makes the difference between people who only hear about someone who's had one of these profound UFO-related experiences and people that actually know those individuals as people, as friends and coworkers. And when you do know them and you you realize the type of people that they are and the quality of the work that they do, then it becomes much easier to believe, what they tell you, even if it's something that's completely out of the usual realm of your belief system, And I think that was the case with everybody that worked with Dr. Marcel at the hospital. Is, if you knew him, you knew that he was not the kind of person that was going to be making up these grandiose tales and telling them on national television, nor would he make up these things, telling his family, his close friends, these about this incident and be untruthful about it. So
yeah, I consider him. I mean, just from only observations of seeing him on different films, but just he seemed like a very humble, very nice guy. And I have spoken to his son, Jesse Marcel III, a few times, and he told us, he was on this show, and he told us how the whole thing really did change his life. He built his own little observatory in the backyard. He started from scratch, and
yes, he did.
Yeah, and but no, I always, I like I said, I never spoke to him, but I always had a lot of respect to him, and respect for him. Tried to get him on the show, and just my timing was off. And actually, I had found out like a week later, after one of the times I tried to get in touch with him, that he had passed away, which was, I know he wasn't a real young person, but still it just seems like it was too soon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think he was, I want to say he was 78 years old when he passed away in August of 2013.
Yeah,
and,
he didn't seem that, he just seemed so much younger than that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, he always, he was quite an athlete, downhill skier, runner. He took good care of himself, and so he, was pretty healthy all his life, as far as I know. As long as I knew him, he was. Until he, went off to fight the war in Iraq. He was in the Army National Guard for years and years, virtually the whole time I knew him, which was for probably 25 years or more. He was a helicopter pilot in the National Guard here in Helena, and so volunteered actually at the age of 68 to go off to Iraq, and served 2 consecutive tours of duty there in Iraq.
Pretty amazing.
Yeah, well, he was
a
kind
patriot.
of interesting that, yeah, he was. He was a patriot, and I always found it sort of surprising to me that despite what happened with the Roswell incident, that he remained very supportive and engaged with the U.S. military, and didn't seem to hold any grudges at all about what transpired, with his father relative to the Roswell incident. And I think he just accepted, as all good soldiers do, the judgment of the people that made these decisions a long time ago about how this was going to be handled, and how this information was going to be managed. And he just seemed to say, well, that's what they decided to do, and that's what we have to go along with, So I always found his attitude kind of interesting. I'm not sure that I would have been quite so willing to, brush all of that aside and continue to be so engaged as he was with the U.S. military. But yeah, he was definitely a patriot, no question.
I wondered what if there was such different times. You go back to 1947, 2 years after the end of the war. that there was a real strong sense of patriotism then, and and people really listened to what the government had to say. Pardon me. And it just makes me wonder, what would it be like if Roswell happened today? You know, I've never really thought of it, but there's so many things that are different. First of all, someone could be out, Braswell, or whatever his name is, Max Bazel, or whatever his name was, could have been out on his ranch with an iPhone taking pictures.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely,
you know?
They probably would have been all over the internet that day.
Been all over Twitter and Facebook, and and then the cover-up. You know, the one thing that I think about Roswell, if it was just a mogul or a weather balloon or whatever they claimed what it was, why would they make such a to-do about picking up every single little tiny scrap on the location, about flying the debris off to different Air Force bases and all that? Why would there be such a fuss? I mean, that's the big question about Roswell. And why did the military, the Air Force, lie like 4 and 5 times, whatever it is, all the way into the 1990s, talking about, instead of just denying that there was any bodies, they said, no, there were crash dummies. You know, I mean, there's just so many moving parts. There is a bit of mythology that goes along with Roswell. You know, you drive through the town itself, and it's become, you know, it's sort of a town of almost, I want to say, ridicule. There's all types of alien things going on there, and everything that kind of would sort of downplay and just make someone driving through there. I mean, I actually personally was contacted by a friend. Just in general conversation, he said he went into Roswell just out of curiosity, and this was way before I ever did this show or really had I had a sight before I had a sighting and was really interested that much in UFOs. And he basically said, people are crazy there. You should see, you know, people are dressed as aliens. And I don't know if he went during the July celebration or whatever, but he just, it just made him say, you know, what a bunch of BS that is. And
well,
so I think there's a lot of myth that goes with Roswell, along with the little bits and pieces of truth that must still be out there.
Well, yeah, and I don't think any of us should be surprised in the least that initially the whole thing was covered up. You know, I think that we should all definitely be questioning whether it's still appropriate today for that cover-up to be continued. I think we're now on our about 3rd edition of explanations from the U.S. military of how they, you know, explain what happened there, and none of the explanations has been really, I think, factual or adequate, in my opinion, and certainly according to, you know, what I was told by Dr. Marcel. And, you know, for people that, you know, remain skeptical about it, I just think that if you consider that that Jess's father, Jesse A. Marcel Sr., Major Marcel, was he was the chief intelligence officer of the 509 bomb group, which was the only nuclear armed squadron in the world in 1947. They would not have had a person who was not very competent in that position, and I'm quite certain that Jess's father would have been able to identify really any kind of conventional material from a balloon or an aircraft or what have you. So the fact that both Jess and his father have always maintained that this material was not from this planet, then, you know, I just don't question that. I don't find it hard to believe. You know, it's a big universe out there. I think it's very likely that there are other civilizations that are far ahead of humanity, at least in their technological development. And I don't think that we should be at all surprised that some of them have found their way here.
I think you're right about that.
Yeah. As far as the Roswell celebration goes, that's just people cashing in on sensationalizing something that really was quite a serious, really a landmark event in the history of our world and mankind. And it's something I think that hopefully one day people will begin to really consider just how momentous that event was and how meaningful it is to, I think, to the future of humanity. But I've never been to the Roswell Summer Festival. Maybe someday I'll go.
It makes me wonder too. Also, what are things going to be like in, say, 100 years from now? Say, well, let me back up with that a little bit. Let's just say, before we actually know for sure, the word's out there, everyone accepts that we are being visited somehow by either a disclosure or a major event. Until that time, I wonder, say 50 years in the future, what Roswell is going to be like. If it, unfortunately, 99% of the people that were alive and witnessed are gone, and things tend to turn into all kinds of crazy myths and things over the years as time goes by. So it would be interesting to know, if you could possibly know, what things will be like. In our chat room, we have a question that came up there from Phil. And do you know anything more about the military/government official that took Jesse Marcel behind closed doors and told him things about UFOs? This person thinks it happened in Washington, D.C. Do you know anything about that?
Dr. Marcel and I talked about that event. He was contacted by, I'm blocking on his name right now, but I think this was someone in the Carter administration. And he got a call from this individual saying, we'd like for you to come to Washington and speak with us about this event. And Linda Marcel, Jess's wife, was actually quite concerned about him being called to Washington about this particular topic, and was, I think, a little bit worried when he left. But apparently they sent him a plane ticket. He went to the White House and got together with this individual, and he told me that they took him to a secured room, which was underground, several levels, and that this individual, I wish I could remember his name. He was one of the people that was sort of higher up in, I think this was in the Carter administration. But anyway, apparently there was a book on the table that was Whitley Strieber's book, I believe, that one that sort of was a fictional account of, well, it was written as a sort of historical fiction book that sort of covered the events of the Roswell incident. And so they asked Dr. Marcel if he had any other information that he wished to share with them about the Roswell incident. And he told them no, that he really didn't. He had publicly spoken about everything that he knew about what he saw and what his father said to him. And he said that this man put his finger on this book and said, well, what's in this book is not fiction. And Jess replied, well, I know that. I already know that. I've seen it. I've handled it. And that's about all that I recall him telling me, but he did tell me that personally. I think that story, if you look around the internet, you can probably find an account of that somewhere. But that's all I really can remember about what we discussed about that.
That's actually pretty amazing, really, if you think about it. Yeah. A question came in through email here, and by the way, the listener can always email me. Every Sunday, I post who the upcoming guest is, and you're welcome to email me during the week at martin@podcastufo.com. Any questions you'd like to ask the upcoming guest. So this question was emailed from Kerry, and he was wondering if Jesse Marcel ever spoke to you about the town people directly affected by the Roswell incident. Was he ever able to talk to you about that?
No, I don't remember ever really having any discussions with him about anybody else in the town. I recall him saying, he was 10 or 11 years old at the time, and then after after they began to cover up what happened and changed all of the reports in the newspapers, etc. And his father came home and he said, basically, we're not to talk about this anymore, ever again in public. And he said, when my dad told me that, I just said, well, okay, and went about riding my bike and, being an 11-year-old boy. But I don't remember him ever mentioning the names of any other individuals. I'm sure he knew quite a number of them, but I don't remember ever discussing that with him.
Okay, and up on the message board, we have a question. Do you think the Roswell incident spurred a complete denial protocol regardless of evidence or testimony? In other words, did officials then set media protocol after the announcement of the disc found and the subsequent reversal in the press?
Well, I think that they went into a full-scale, suppression of that information by every means they could. And I think that included, swearing people that were there to secrecy and threatening some people in the town that were civilians. And, I think that they took whatever measures they felt they had to do to keep this event completely off the radar.
The part about them threatening just civilians, that always baffles me. I can't think of any other case. I'm sure there are cases out there, but I can't think of any other cases. And getting back to earlier, kind of when we were talking about would the government cover it up? Does the government lie? I just had Heather Wade on a few minutes ago, and we were talking about, I listened to this show the other night on her show, and it was a ex-CIA very important. He had many very important international roles, and he's on her show saying, yes, the government lies. It lies, and he said, and he was talking about torture, basically. This was a whistleblower that went to jail for revealing that, the only one that went to jail for revealing that there was torture in Guantanamo Bay. And he said, he talked about, he goes, and George Bush said, there was no torture, and he lied. And, he's talking about the government just plain lies. And it's amazing. I find that amazing. And this is another case. And, you're going back, 60 some odd years, or almost, is it 70 years? 70 years.
60, yeah, pretty close to 70 years now.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, this was an unprecedented event. I mean, this is an event that occurs initially, at least, one time in the development of a complex society designed by a intelligent civilization of, in our case, human beings. Something like this it's stupendous, and the social, the the possible social ramifications of this have not even been realized yet. Almost 70 years later, but one day they will be. And I think the implications for our civilization are going to be tremendous with respect to a whole wide variety of different topics.
Yes, I noticed in the brochure that you handed me out in Phoenix about the Jesse Marcel Library. You have this little pamphlet that you hand out, and you address a lot of these situations in that pamphlet. What things would change if there was disclosure, and the revelation that, yes, we are being visited. I personally, one of the things I think is that I don't, as big of a deal as it would be, like the most amazing news of the millennia, maybe, that there are other intelligent beings out there. If that became public knowledge, I don't think there's going to be a big upheaval in society like the past predictions. I just don't see that. I think the more we get used to the idea that there's Earth-like planets out there, and the more that people accept that there's possibly life out there, the less of an impact this will make. What's your take on that?
Sure. Yeah, I think, and that may have been one of the goals, relative to the cover-up, is just to present this information to humanity at a later date when we had sort of caught up a little bit with what they, I'm sure, recognized at the very moment they laid eyes on it, and started looking through this material, that this was something that was far beyond present-day technology back in 1947, and that relative to what they were seeing there, that our technology back then was pretty primitive and may still be so today. But I think basically part of it's just been a matter of trying to buy time, for our society to catch up in our thoughts and our technology, our spiritual development as well, and hopefully be better equipped at some point in time. And I have no idea when the powers that be are going to determine that they think the time is right for this to happen. I have to think that it's probably going to be, pretty soon, but who knows? I
think people have been saying that since the 1950s, though.
Yeah,
they really have. There's a question again on the message board. Were there previous instances? I don't think there were any previous instances where the government officials at first announced something like a UFO and then retracted it right away. I can't think of any. I can think of a lot of instances where there was some type of cover-up. For instance, the Phoenix lights. There were flares shot off afterwards that the Air Force could say, yes, it was just flares. Although that was at 10 o'clock when the Phoenix Lights sighting happened, more like 8 o'clock. Excuse me. So I understand there are instances like that, but not particular to what this listener is asking. I can't think of any. Can you, of any incidences where there was a cover-up right away about another UFO crash or UFO?
No, I can't think of any right offhand. And that may be because certainly I'm sure that systems became designed to be in place very quickly after that event happened to prevent another possible, incident from getting out of hand and away from the military and intelligence agencies. So probably I would say it's likely that they started making plans quite right away to jump on these things before they almost escaped their oversight, as Roswell almost did.
Right. There's a lot of need-to-know situations compartmentalized in the government, and which makes me wonder, is there anyone today in the government that actually knows the truth about Roswell, since we're talking about Roswell? Or is it so disjointed at this point that there's no knowledge in the government at all about Roswell? Is that something that Jesse ever pondered or you ever thought about?
I never really discussed that with him. But I have to think that there certainly would be records somewhere, put away about, to historically document what happened. And so I would be very surprised if all of those had been destroyed. And, I think it would be quite a simple matter for any documents and stuff like that to be hidden away. And, even in places where we wouldn't think to look, but I just have to think that it's very likely that if there's nobody alive to give a personal account of what happened there, that there will always be available some sort of records that have been, put away in some very secure storage to document what really was probably the most momentous event in the history of mankind.
Yeah, I would say. Now, there was the ex-CIA agent Chase Brandon, who actually said that he saw the thing, I don't understand that whole situation. I don't know if you've looked into it or at all, but he was saying that he saw a box that said Roswell. To me, I think that's the last. It doesn't make any sense. It would be the last thing in the world that if there was actually Roswell artifacts in a box somewhere, hidden somewhere, it wouldn't say Roswell. It would be numbered or something like that. It would some type of code. But unless, maybe I'm totally wrong about that. I don't know. But have you ever looked into Chase Brandon and what he said?
Yeah, I've heard what he said, and I think I did a little bit of checking to find out if he was who he said he was, and I came to the conclusion that he was who he said he was. Mm-hmm. And therefore, I don't have any reason to think that he was lying about it, I know there have been a lot of people who think that he was lying, but I don't see. To me, all of these revelations that we get from people like Chase Brandon are part of the process that we're going through here, where we're being sort of gradually, very slowly, and I think for me, it's slow enough that it's quite frustrating, being sort of conditioned to be able to accept all of this new reality in stride, and just to be able to roll with it right away. And I suspect that statements like that come out periodically from people like Chase Brandon are intended to be part of that process.
So in a way, do you think, in a roundabout way, do you think he was sort of like a disinformation agent in a way to soften the whole situation? Is that what you're getting at, or?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily even say it was disinformation. What he said may well be true. None of us are going to be able to walk into that Langley CIA library or facility or whatever it was to prove whether he's right or wrong. So there's really, I think what he said could very well be true. But even if it wasn't true, just the underlying theme of what he was trying to get at, I think, is the important aspect of it. And that is to have somebody who was a lifetime career CIA in the clandestine services group of the CIA coming out on national radio and saying that he saw this box of materials. And whether there was a box of materials, I think is really kind of not that important. Really, the message was Roswell happened, and there's evidence to support that statement. And it was a UFO, and it was extraterrestrial, and he saw the bodies, or pictures of the bodies. So that's the important part. Whether the box exists or not, really, I don't even care that much. I just think it's remarkable that somebody in the clandestine services of the CIA, I mean, you know that he didn't get on national radio and make a statement like that without having clearance to do so.
Yeah, you would think so.
Well, yeah,
because he would be in some pretty deep trouble if he didn't, I would think.
Yeah, sure. I mean, these guys, you know, even if they retire from the CIA, they're never actually gone from their duties as far as those kinds of things are concerned, you know. So I'm quite sure that he was acting as he had been cleared to do. And so do I think people should pay attention to it? Absolutely, I do. Yeah.
Do you think that, say, American citizens should be aware that there has been a cover-up?
Oh, most definitely, yeah.
Do you think that there would, when it comes to the UFO subject, I don't know how many people really think about it, though. You know, I mean, that's the part where I know that a lot of people I know, and, you know, we meet at, like, the Phoenix conference out there, and we're surrounded by people that have a real interest in it. But the average American, with a busy life, sometimes I wonder how much the average American really even thinks about it or cares. You know, I imagine if it's something that would hit them in the face, you know, in other words, all of a sudden they see a UFO or something like that, those people would seem to care. But the average person, I'm wondering how much they would actually care. Excuse me.
Well, yeah, I think that probably the average person doesn't care too much about this because it doesn't directly affect or impact their lives so far as they know. And in my opinion, it does affect all of our lives quite profoundly. But it's hard to imagine, you know, the degree to which it might be affecting our lives based upon the society that we're living in and how it might have been different today had the world been told the truth 70 years ago. You know, we can sort of sit and ponder about how things could possibly be different today in this world that we're living in, and I think it might be quite different. But for the average person who's just, you know, out there going to their job every day and coming home to their families in the evening and having their friends and some social time, you know, there's not a lot of time left over really for things like this. And I'm not sure actually that had I not known Dr. Marcel for as long as I did and as well as I did, that I would have become that interested in it. It's possible maybe that I wouldn't have. I don't know, you know. But as I said, when you know him, as I did, and spoke with him about this, and you know, unfortunately, I don't think that I have a lot of extra information to offer people about the details of what happened. You know, basically, I probably know about the same, you know, amount of level of detail about what actually happened as a lot of people that have actually looked at this in detail, you know. But the fact that I heard it from him and I knew him and I know what kind of person that he was makes it much more real to me, you know. And so unfortunately most people don't have that opportunity to know him or someone else that was directly connected to the event. But when you hear about it from a person that you do know well and you feel that you can trust what they say, then it just changes the whole situation for you. You know, you suddenly become aware that, wow, this was real. This happened. And then you start to realize what that means. Well, it does mean that our government engineers our society's perceptions of reality in certain things that they think are of grave enough importance to do that.
Right.
And this was one of those events that is, had the potential and still does to change the fabric of our reality.
Absolutely.
And so, yeah.
I'd like to ask you a question, and we're getting right at the top of the hour here, coming right up. In the second part of the show, I want to ask you about your crop circle research and also about the citizen hearing on disclosure, et cetera. But for right now, can you tell us a little bit about what is the Jesse Marcel Library?
Yeah, well, when Dr. Marcel came back from Iraq, he was quite a different person than when he left. He was living in conditions there that I think were responsible for why he came back with a pretty remarkable case of PTSD. And it was very obvious to me when we would sit in his living room and we would be talking and the door would slam, he'd come up out of his chair. And he was never like that before he went to Iraq. He was as you can imagine, having someone that's very reactive like that is not a great thing for a surgeon. And so I noticed that quite dramatically when he came back from Iraq. And that got better over several years, but it never completely went away. And then the other thing that happened, and I don't know if this was related to the time he spent in Iraq, but I suspect that it probably was, is he developed a peripheral neuropathy in his legs and had a lot of difficulty with what we call ataxia, where he was unsteady, on his feet, and ended up having to wear braces on both legs because of bilateral foot, both feet foot drop. And so, he came back in a sort of a debilitated condition, from when he left after these 2 tours of duty in Iraq. And so I spoke with him about, basically one day I just said, Jess, you're not getting any younger, and this story that you have been trying to get across to the world is going to perhaps go away, when you go away. And so maybe it would be a good idea if I opened up a library and I named it after your father. And so he said, well, I think my father would be really very honored to have that. And so if you feel like that's what you want to do and you feel that this would help to carry on the story of Roswell and help to educate people. And I thought, well, what better place to try to help educate people than a library? And so I went ahead and opened up the Jesse A. Marcel Library, which I'm kind of thinking maybe I should change the name of it now to the Jesse A. Marcel Memorial Library. But it's located near my home, just outside of Helena. And it's open on Tuesday evenings from 7 to 10 p.m. And I've got quite a number of books and articles that I've printed from the internet and DVDs from like speakers that have presented at the International UFO Congress each year. I've got, entire sets of DVDs of the speakers that have been there, and other DVDs that probably many of your listeners have seen or heard. But so I just try to make this information available to the public and people that become interested in learning more about it. And there's, quite a few people that have come in there that have really not known that much about the UFO phenomenon, but want to learn more about it. And I think our society is starting to realize that there's definitely something to this,
Now, this library, do you have old books, old UFO books in there as well?
I do have a few. Some of George Adamski's books, Wendell Stevens' books. So I have a few books that are older books. Problem with a lot of these that I'm running into with older UFO books is a lot of them are now becoming collector's items.
Yes.
And, some of them will range up in the $200-$300 range,
That's
and
right.
Since I'm financing this library on my own, then I try to stick with some of the more, mainstream books. Like an example would be Philip Corso's book, The Day After Roswell. Of course, I have Dr. Marcel's book, The Roswell Legacy, on the shelf. I have Leslie Kane's book, UFOs, Generals, Pilots, and Military Officials Go on the Record. That's an excellent book and one that I would recommend to anybody who's trying to just start to learn more information about the UFO phenomenon. That would probably be the book where I would start with, So a lot of these books are really, that have quite a bit of good information are not that old. Going back to Richard Dolan's, UFOs in the National Security State, I think that's probably been out published for 20 years maybe.
Is it that long?
I don't remember when it was.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm not sure. It may not have been that long, but a lot of this published information that we have available about the facts about the UFO phenomenon have not been out that long. So
now let me ask you this: we have quite a few listeners to the show. Are you looking for people to donate books?
Sure. Yeah, I think it would probably be best for them to contact me by email and ask me if we already have the book, because
right.
I don't want to end up with a whole bunch of redundant, copies of books. But I have pretty limited bookshelf space right now, although there is quite a bit of room for expansion. But yeah, if anybody has any books or any other UFO related documents, materials that they want to have preserved, and archived, absolutely, I would love to hear from them and find out if it's something that we don't have, that I would definitely like to bring it to the library.
All right, I'll talk to you a little bit about that. I have a number of books myself. Pardon me. And I have, I'm one of these people that have, I'm into antiques and fine art and all that, and I'm really into early UFO books. I would never give them up if I find them. But, and I have a lot of dibs out there to a lot of antique book dealers that just deal in libraries of books all the time, and they all know that I want any UFO books that they come across. So, so the website is jaml.org. Did I say that right?
Yes, that's correct. jaml.org.
And so a listener can contact you through that website. There's a contact form, I believe, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. So we're at the top of the hour, and so that's it, everybody, for the free part of the show. If you'd like to support the show and help us out, you can listen to this entire show, and it becomes really good in the second hour. Also, you can listen to all the old archives of all the other shows and any media player out there, even on your iPhone and iTunes and all that. So you just go to our website, podcastufo.com, and you'll see Support the Show. Click on that. It's a real easy sign-up, a one-time sign-up, and you'll be all set. And if you have any trouble, let me know. And thanks so much, everyone, for listening. If you can't support the show, we love you anyway. And next week, we have Robert Powell on. Should be a great show. That's going to be on the Texas Stevensville incident around the Bush Ranch and all that. That should be really an interesting show. He's a great UFO researcher I think he's out of Illinois now. He was out of Texas. But anyway, thanks for listening again, and we'll be back here next week. Keep your eyes to the sky.